So yeah, and there is, you know, the idea now that Jesuit Social Services in Victoria have got this project on the man box, and when we sort of do the man box in the men's group, and we sort of work that idea in from Tony Porter and his TED talk, which is very good if you get a chance to see it. And it's amazingly resonant in the group.
Yes,
Men get this idea of the man box, and they get the idea of if you're not in the man box, you're what they, you know, we're using their terms here. You're a wuss, you're a faggot, you're a pussy, you're gay, very homophobic, very disrespectful to men who might not fit in that man box. So part of our work in the group was trying to dismantle the man box and say to men, you know, how has being in this man box negatively affected your life and negatively affected other people in your life? What would happen if the walls of the man box were broken down? How would you be free? How does the man box become a prison for you as a man? And what does being in the man box do to your mental health? What does it do to your relationships? What does it do to your suicidality, you know? So all those sorts of areas that they found in the man box project in Victoria that affect men. So that was again, it was part of the process of trying to get men in group to see that there may be an alternative way rather than hypermasculinity of being a man and being a safe man with intimate partners, a safe man as a father, a safe man with other men, you know. So I saw a statement that the riskiest place for a young man to be is out with his mates on a Saturday night. The riskiest place for a woman to be is at home on a Saturday night with a partner. Yeah. So, and I think there's some truth to that.
It's interesting. As you probably know, my PhD was also on masculinity, and it occurred to me that masculinity is something that is often observed more in the breach than in the present. So that so it's kind of a policing sort of thing. Men are free to be themselves until someone points out that doing that makes them unmasculine, and then they alter themselves back to this kind of central template. And I argued that in cultures you have a central template around gender.
A masculine script.
And if you look at the difference between the masculine script and the feminine script, if you're truly feminine, there's no power in it at all. You're always subservient, you're always helpful, you're always kind, you're always, you know, there might be great moral virtue in that, but there's no actual power in it. Whereas the male one is about always being powerful and that sort of thing. And perhaps
I think the problem is the skewed nature of that.
It is very skewed.
So every person should have opportunities for both. When it's one or the other, the male script of power and control and aggression and entitlement and privilege tends to be the superior level, and the feminine script of the nurturing, the kindness, the mothering, the deference is the inferior. And another exercise we would do in the men's program is we would look at those scripts, and we would say, if we would look at the binaries in the script too.
They're binary scripts.
If the man is strong in your relationship, what does the woman have to be? What does your partner have to be? She's got to be weak. If the man is loud, the woman has to be quiet, silent, subservient. If the man is right, then the woman has to be wrong.
If the man is rational, the woman has to be
irrational.
Or
the man is logical.
We call it intuitive.
Yeah,
it's still the same.
Exactly. The man is logical, the woman is emotional. So, and which is the superior one in each of those binaries? So you know, having men in the group look at that and and discuss that as where does that put a woman in a relationship then? And where does that put women in your life? And if a woman doesn't act that way, how do you, we're talking about policing men. Men police women because I've had a man in group say, I beat her up because she wasn't acting like a woman should. And my question to him was, well, who decides how a woman should act? And he said, I do. You know, and the group just sort of sat back in stunned silence. And then we looked at how is it that a man gets to decide how his partner is a woman? So, you know, that part of male culture, that script is really teased out in the groups that I've been in, and my belief is that I don't like the term men's behaviour change programs because it's easy to have behaviour change when you've got courts, police, probation and parole, facilitators looking at you and assessing you. You can do the right thing. You might not hit her, you might not touch her physically, but your attitude and your belief about power and control and coercion over her is still there.
Yes.
So you can control her with a look. You might control her with a raised eyebrow. You might control her with a tone of your voice. You can make her afraid. Those beliefs and attitudes have to be dealt with in the group. And it's the beliefs and attitudes of that script that have to be really, I believe, unpacked.
So let's go into that just a little bit. Evan Stark, for example, has proposed a model of coercive control, and I think more and more the way we look at family violence, coercive control is taking a much more important role. It's no longer were you physically violent, were you emotionally violent? The question is, were you controlling? And the question I want to ask is, why do men want to control women? I mean, and does it go the other way? Do women have the same desire to control men but don't have the resources or the position to do it from? What's going on here? What underlies this idea?
I guess we all like to be in control of our lives. We all like to be in control of situations. It's an uncomfortable feeling not to be in control of situations generally, and I can only speak from the man's perspective.
Isn't the essence of a good relationship being willing to give up control?
Well, I would think so. I would think so, and to feel safe in that.
Yes, to feel safe in it.
I think the
knowing
problem
she could push all of my buttons, and knowing she won't. And likewise.
I think in terms of a man wanting control, and I mean, this control is part of the male script, that a real man controls his partner. A real man calls the shots. A real man makes the decisions. A real man is the master of his castle. So it plays into that script, and I think Evan Stark was completely right that there doesn't have to be any physical abuse for a man to have a woman terrified and intimidated, and men have that those resources, as you call them, and I worked with a man who he would. This was in America. He would, when he wanted to send a very strong message about her kowtowing, being subservient to him on any certain day, he would put a shotgun shell on the kitchen table. That was his message. This was a farming community. And that's a whole other story because of resources and services available to people who aren't in urban areas is a whole increased level of risk. But where does that and why does that control? Well, I think it's part of that part of that male script. But, you know, again, being careful of single variable solutions and answers. I think it also comes possibly from attachment issues that man may have had from his own traumatised childhood and insecure attachments. I wonder, I'm not definite about that. There's a lot of surmising and wondering in this work, you know, and there's different pathways for different men, I believe, to arrive at the same beliefs about being a man, a real man, and those masculine scripts. So I'm very loath to be absolute in my assessment of how men got there, and you know, whether women's desire to be in control is because of their experiences of being on the receiving end of men's control, and they want to level the playing field at times. But you're right, I don't think women have historically have had the same resources, and physically may not have the same resources.
I think there's another thing too, and that is in a patriarchal society, power will be used patriarchally. So anyone using the power will be using it as power over. So if a woman is in that position, she will be using it, but she will be using it in a patriarchal manner. That is going to cause a variety of conflicts for her that it won't for a man. But nevertheless, power is still going to be used that way. It's about how power is used in a systemic way rather than through, you know, mediated through individuals, but it doesn't originate with individuals.
No, and I think that that says a lot about a woman's experience when a court may dismiss her pleas for safety, or police dismissive of a domestic violence incident. That level of patriarchal power. It's the system further victimising a woman who's already the victim of a violent partner.
And I also think it's a patriarchal system victimizing men, because then men are not believed when they report instances of violence, because a man can't be violent, a woman can't be violent.
That broaches a whole new area of
it's a difficult area.
Well, it is, but I can only talk from my belief and experience, and I know women can be violent, but my experience in working in the space I work in, a woman's violence tends to be a reactive violence, tends to be a violence which is often in self-defense, tends to be a violence which is fighting back. I'm not putting up with this anymore. And my experience has been a woman's violence tends to push a violent man away, where a man's violence wants to bring her in and oppress and subjugate her. Beat her down.
That's a really nice distinction, actually.
And again, I'm generalising, but I'm sure there are exceptions to the rule.
Yes, I agree. It's an area that's very contested at the moment.
It is contested, but I think it's.
But I think that's really handy, the way you've talked about bringing in and pushing away.
Well, I
think
hope
that's
so.
a good way of characterizing it.
I believe that the conflict tactic scale research from the 90s has a lot to blame, because that research portrayed men's violence and women's violence as pretty much equal and opposite. But I think the whole methodology and the questioning around that research was suspect, because it the whole sexual assault question was never asked initially, and the level of severity wasn't part of it. So
control is never asked.
No, it was not a part of it, and I think that did our sector a disservice in the long run, and I think it certainly did victims a disservice. Interestingly, I call them the 3 S's: sexual assault, strangulation, and stalking, or that surveillance, tend to be male patterns of behaviour in domestic violence, much more than females.
So, and those are all high risk.
Very high risk, very high risk. So I think that just alerts us to the fact that what we're dealing with here is male violence towards women and children. And once we start to, well, what about violent women? I think we enter a territory where, again, it can be an excuse to take the focus on the real source and cause of the human rights issue we're dealing with here, which World Health Organization called men's violence to women. And that's, if we solve that, I think, you know, it could have a domino effect for a lot of other areas of violence. If we can keep women and children safe, we'll keep men safe.
Yes,
so,
and as we pointed out, men are more likely to be the victims of other men
yes,
than they are of women.
indeed.
And you rarely ever hear men complaining about men's violence, which
No.
I think is really
Yeah,
interesting.
yeah, yeah.
It's sort of like, well, that's accepted or even deserved in
Yeah.
some instances when
Yeah.
it's in the interest of policing masculinity,
yeah,
for example.
yeah, it is. It's
That's,
sad.
that's just
Yeah.
okay.
Mm.
But as soon as anything happens, as soon as a woman may use violence
Well,
in
it's
a
almost,
similar manner,
yeah,
then
it makes the news.
it
It's
makes
the headlines.
news. Yes, exactly.
But it's almost like that hierarchy or pecking order of in male culture. You know,
Yes.
the top dogs
Yeah.
call the shots for men, and the others just are policed and try to keep inside the man box as best they can.
It's funny, Michel Foucault once made the comment that the interesting thing about male friendships is they're not hierarchical. It's the only part of a man's life that's not conducted in a hierarchy. And I think that again speaks a lot to patriarchy. I mean, in my own research, I concluded that patriarchy and masculinity is the identity base of patriarchy. I've actually called it the ambassador of patriarchy. It's the way patriarchy becomes embedded in individual psyches and that sort of thing, and sort of has that bridging link that is, you know, often missing between our descriptions of the social world and our descriptions of the individual psychological world.
So it's really, I feel, incumbent when we're looking at cultures and society and communities and structures. It's incumbent on all men to have a good hard look at ourselves and how we, maybe through silence and passivity, are complicit in you know in violence or abuse or coercive control.
Yeah. This is sometimes called the bystander effect or whatever. Do you want to share some thoughts on that? What should men be doing to say to other men, you don't have peers here?
That's a hard question. In 2007, I was in Melbourne, and it was on the morning. It was early in the morning. A man dragged a woman out of a nightclub, and two men who were bystanders intervened. Both were shot. One dead. Brendan, young lawyer with a young family.
I think I remember that.
He was killed. The other man was a Dutch backpacker, Paul van der Wal, I think it was his name. He survived. So there's dangers in intervening in some areas. But between doing nothing and getting shot, there's a lot of options available. So certainly, you know, if a bystander sees or knows of an event or an incident where a woman is being assaulted, you know, obviously calling police, calling first responders is critical. Maybe calling on other men to help to deal with that incident. They're the really extreme cases, of course, but it goes right back to calling, I think, sexist jokes in the workplace. It goes to saying, you know, to another man, that comment's not cool. I mean, you can't. In this day and age, we shouldn't, as men, we shouldn't be saying things like that. That's not who we are as men.
Yeah, or just not laughing. I don't find it funny.
Yeah, that's right. So there's a whole range of things I think that men can do. Big elephant in the room, I think, is pornography. I think, men and pornography, that's a conversation that we're not having clearly. What that's doing to you know, it's a sex education for young boys, I think, this day and age. What that's doing to neural pathways. We know there's a link between violent porn and sexual assault, sexual violence in relationships. We know that men in the groups we run, there's violent porn there. We have to have those conversations. And
actually, one of my honors students did some research on that and found that the range of, depending on the amount and range, it was both. But men who used, young university students who used porn the most and looked at the widest variety had also the least respectful attitudes towards women.
Indeed.
And that was a relationship of statistical significance.
And like we've got to stop using terms like violent pornography, I think, and child porn. I mean, what we're dealing with there are crime scenes.
Yes,
in reality. So to have these freely available, we don't allow those in the cinema. We don't allow that stuff on TV. We have censorship
you have to go
there,
home for that.
and yet it's at the click of your phone. It's there.
That's right.
And we're not dealing with that very well as a society. And I don't think we know what's going to be the outcomes for young boys who've grown up with that sort of. What neural path? What lessons are they learning about sexuality, sexual relationships, women? You know, we're gonna reap what we sow as a society down that pathway. I think, if we're not reaping it already.
Yes.
And you know, the sad thing is, women again are going to be the victims.
Yes. Yeah. I think that's a really good point. Can I raise the issue of narcissistic offenders with you? A lot of people are now saying, well, men who use violence are narcissists. Do you have a reaction to that?
I do. Again, I'm cautious about labels. I'm cautious about excuses. I'm cautious about saying. Okay, you're a narcissist, therefore you're violent. We blame your narcissism for your violence. There'd be plenty of narcissists, and you know, we've all got our narcissistic tendencies that who aren't violent. Have I noticed that men are very egotistical and self-focused and lacking in empathy in group? Yes. Does that mean they're fully blown narcissistic personality disorders? They may be tending in that direction. But I'm not. I don't have the capacity to diagnose and label them with that. Would that actually help the work that I do, where I'm focusing on violence? Probably not. Can I use their sense of entitlement and self-focus in my work in rehabilitating them from violence? Possibly. So you know, when a man starts in a group, it's all about him, you know, and I'll say, well, this program might actually help you have less fines in your life, less visits to court, less police incursion into your life.
Better relationship with your children.
Yeah, that might be down the track, but certainly getting to see, well, there could be some personal benefits for me for completing this program. Can be a first step for a man to actually begin the program. So I don't focus on narcissism a lot, but I notice it in group.
The relationship with the children is another one. I can still remember being at Tulare and having a father say to his son, we didn't normally see perpetrators at Tulare, but in this instance we were, and he said to his son, you're here because you have a problem with violence, and then he paused and said, and that's exactly why I'm here. And you could see that he was starting on, and years later I caught up with that boy, and the boy said his father never used violence again after the program. And this was 5 years, at least 5 years later.
That's fabulous. And certainly I think men's programs, we talk about you know, men's programs and men holding men accountable. I think our system, our programs, and the men on our programs, one of the accountabilities that we have is accountability to men's children.
Yes, I believe that deeply.
And so certainly on the programs we're dealing with safe parenting and respectful parenting, and that's really important. But I don't know that we've got enough services. We have like the women's advocate for the partner. I don't know that we've got sufficient services, if any, in some areas, to deal with the children of the men on the program, to pick up those pieces, and to have resources available. So there are still significant gaps in our systems, definitively, and definitely. I think children are not receiving the benefit of programs that they need. And
And well, while you're doing that, there are currently some really innovative programs. One of them you would know very well, because I think one of your PhD students has developed it, Dave Burke, the Renew program, which is a really remarkable
Renew is for adolescent males who are violent to their mums, and that's an area of great need, I think. I used the term radicalisation before, and I think, you know, a male adult perpetrator consciously or unconsciously radicalises a young boy, his son or her son possibly, to become the next generation of violent abusers because of that passing on of the male script, passing on of the you know, the rigid gender role idea, passing on of patriarchy, that hyper masculine.
There's two other ways too where it gets passed on. One of them is in the fact that a boy who watches his mother being mistreated only imagines more of the same as the solution. So, you know, you're saying there, it's something that fascinated me when I started working with children at Tulare, was how much they adored superheroes. And it suddenly occurred to me that the superhero was the person who was able to use power for good. But he used power in exactly the same way. He still, Spider-Man doesn't persuade the other characters not to be evil. He beats them up. And that's what the boy wanted to do. He wanted to use power to defend his mom. But his understanding of power is how you maintain control of a situation. He wants to regain
distorted,
control.
Isn't it? Yeah.
The second thing that I found was a lot of boys felt conflicted. They thought they were like their dad. And I've had one boy I worked with whose image was, who really found a lot of relief in Harry Potter. Because Harry Potter has a bit of the evil Voldemort in him. And it was like, I can see that I'm like Dad in these ways, but I'm like Mom in these ways, and I don't want to be like Dad. I want to be able to make the same choices Harry Potter makes. And I thought that was interesting. I don't know if J.K. Rowling had that in mind when she created the character that way, but I can think of at least one child that brought enormous relief to. So there's also some other ways. It's not always just the child sees violence, the child does violence. I'm sure it's not simply modeling, which is a psychological construct anyway, but it's more than that. It's about how the child understands what violence will achieve. Interestingly,
the adverse childhood experience research, and this floored me when I read this. It motivated me to believe that the work that we do with violent men is even more important than I thought it was. That if we could stop children witnessing violence when they're children, I forget the exact statistics, but it was something like 58% of adult depression, 75% of suicide rate in males, 53% of drug addiction, and 65% of alcoholism could be stopped. If we just could stop children witnessing violence in the home as children,
Yeah. And
we
as-
would have a different society, a different generation following us.
Yeah, and as Emma and I talk about in our conversation, it's children who witness violence have the same impact as children who actually experience it. So there's so if you're a child and you're watching violence and living in a home that's chronically tense and fearful because of violence, your parents may just as well be abusing you directly.
Well,
You're
yeah,
not protecting
yeah.
children by confining violence elsewhere, and it's a message we need to hear.
And certainly in group, I never use the term your children witnessed your violence. I always say
Affected
your
by.
children have been abused by you.
Yeah,
If they saw you doing that to mum,
yeah,
they are victims of violence.
yeah, yeah. It's,
And I think there's a sort of a diminishment or a minimisation when they say, oh yeah, they might have seen that. They didn't see it. They're abused kids.
yes, exactly. Yeah, yeah. You can't be a good parent and a bad partner in some parts.
No.
And it's something that people find very difficult to even today to come to terms with.